sometimes we think that incorporating open science into teaching means teaching a course on open science, but it may not be always possible to do that. So we would like to know, what is your advice for teachers who have predefined courses or content, but want to introduce more open science principles into their teaching?
Yeah, that's a good question, and to some extent, my answer is the same as Philly's response to your excellent interview with him in terms of starting small. I think even in a course like this, I didn't necessarily label it as open science, and I think often that can be problematic for causing responses and having sometimes some uncomfortable conversations, perhaps sometimes with colleagues, about why that is something you're talking about in a module that isn't really related to that, supposedly. Like, you can differentiate and split apart the quality or the evidence that we talk about and the ways in which it was created. They are inherently the same part of the same process. So I think it's really important that we acknowledge that. And so my advice is not necessarily to try and tackle everything all at once. Start small. Don't have to label it as open science. You don't have to focus on that. But instead, you can think about ways of embedding that way of thinking and building a propensity to start asking the right sort of questions. So for sometimes it might be, clinically breaking down a source of evidence and saying, what can we take from this if we acknowledge the role of this or the potential of that, and having those sorts of meaningful discussions. You're not teaching them what is pre-registration or why it's useful to share data, but they're gaining that same way of thinking, that importance of reflecting upon that. And my other advice is to think about ways you can embed it, which means it's more sustainable. So often, I don't know if everybody else does, but I worry if I was to drop off the end of the earth, what would happen if somebody picked up what I was doing? Would they be able to understand what I was doing, why I was doing it, and then still deliver it? Or would they likely get rid of those bits of open science stuff that I'm really passionate about and instead put more boring content stuff in? So my suggestion here is embed it, and then it's hard to get rid of. As soon as, for example, you build it into an assignment, it takes 12 months to change an assignment and people don't like to do that, and paperwork and all those things, so they stick with it. So my advice is find ways to build it into the structure of stuff, and that means it's generally more sustainable. So, for example, you can do that with assignments. One you could do for a course on anything is plan a replication of a study and then get them to break down what are the most important decisions and would they do things the same or differently and why. Even though that might be considered quite a casual assignment, that in of itself gets that critical thinking, but also the application of more kind of subject-specific knowledge. So kind of build it into the framing that we can talk about evidence in any field without, we have to understand how it's created to know how to apply it. So acknowledging that and building that into the design of things, I think is really important. So, why are we using this sample rather than this? Why do we use that sampling strategy rather than this one? What might the implications be if we did this other thing? And I think some academics have a tendency to do really boring assignments, essays, exams. I don't think they assess people for the right skills for the future. What we're going to need is people who are engaged, who are able to think critically, and who are prioritizing that towards the right direction. So global goals, informed themes, those sorts of things. So if we can change assignments and get students, it forces them to go through that kind of mental change and that mental process. And I think that's really important. So for me, don't necessarily see you have to change absolutely everything. If you're starting a course from scratch, it's easy to embed that within the structure. But don't worry about trying to change everything. Embed little ideas and notions that get students thinking in that way. And that can be a really powerful mechanism, especially because some people are quite averse and openly averse to open science type ways of thinking and practices. It just gives you that little first step of positive kind of development in that direction. I think that's really powerful.
I have a curiosity. I don't think we discussed grading or marking the assignments or the final mark of the course as a whole. How does that work?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so it's purely based on that evidence portfolio.
Okay, it's a
and again,
portfolio.
yeah, and each one has different criteria. So, for example, the literature review, it has criteria of criticality. So, have they demonstrated critical thoughts? It has an element of evidence. So the criteria is, have you picked a wide range of sources of evidence? So not just academic, not just quantitative, for example. And have you chosen different types of sources? So, real world statistics, expert views, academic sources, obviously, and all those other things. And so there's a variety of criteria. Again, they're all publicly shared and open to kind of look at those things. And again, it's to try and make sure that what we evaluate and what we assess the students on is well aligned to what we're hoping is changed within them, which is the way they think, the way they present things. Are they able to extract a clear conclusion? Have they synthesized that body of evidence? So another factor is, have they been descriptive and basically said, these are the 10 most relevant sources of evidence, here's what they say? Or have they attempted to integrate, to synthesize them in a way that tells us they've understood it, but also they're able to extract a direction for the future from those sources of evidence? So that's an attempt to kind of align all the priorities with the skills that we spoke about.